In episode 1, we talked a lot about Diane Parker. This episode was all about Kirsten Blaze Lobato, who goes by Blaze, about her upbringing and kind of everything that led to her arrest. So she also talks about her attack, which we'll get into. One thing for me, and I want to touch on, which we touched on in the episode, is her sexual assaults as a child, her rapes. When Blaze lived with her mother's boyfriend went to prison for raping Blaze and his own daughter. Like, dear God. So Blaze says that she was raped by, she actually gives a name during trial, which I was like, ooh, says that she was raped by this ex-boyfriend, goes to police, like is devastated that this happens, gives all the details, and nothing's done, right? I think that's a common theme. Sexual assault, rapes, not a lot done in Las Vegas. Well, this is Nevada, so in Nevada. 13 goes to police about her rape. Nothing's done. A few years later, the police come back to her and say, hey, he's been involved in a lot of other sexual assaults. And Blaze, as she testifies to this, she says, I was going to help them, but it was kind of annoying because they didn't help me, and now they need my help, you know? So 6, 13, and then 17, she testifies to her friend's father also sexually abusing her. So there's so much going on here. I think an inclination for people could be to, like, you know, when we talk about her drug use, they just write it off, you know? And I know that was touched on in the movie.
Yeah. And it's really sickening that the prosecution saw it as a lever they could pull to hold that against her to justify, because like you said, this was not a robbery or a spur of the moment murder. This was like an absolute rage. So how could they justify and explain how an 18-year-old girl could have that much anger towards a homeless man? Like what would prompt that? And they leveraged her sexual abuse in her past. They insinuated she took all of her past trauma out on this guy and got all of her steam out that had built up over time. Yeah. And that's just absolutely sickening. So
I want to talk about how did they even get to Blaze, right? Yeah. So the game of telephone has always made me crazy. And when I would report on this, even in the podcast, it's like, so Blaze goes and talks to a teacher, Dixie Tinkin. Dixie Tinkin then calls probation officer Laura Johnson. Laura Johnson then calls or speaks to one of the sergeants up in Pioche, where she's from. The Pioche tells her to call Metro. Laura Johnson calls Metro. Like, it's like, whenever I talk about this, it's like Dixie said that, Laura said that, police said, it's like this chitter chatter of telephone. Like, you could just be arrested for someone saying something without, like, I could call and say, Austin did this, and then you're just arrested.
Yeah, and even though you say, oh, well, they got the confession later, well, they had already decided they're arresting her. So whether she admitted it or not, third-hand knowledge is not a witness to anything. And in the trial, in the transcripts, they said that they didn't drive to Blaze's house to interrogate her, they drove to arrest her. No. They said drove to her house to arrest her.
You know, the crazy thing is like, I've reread these court documents, all the things, like multiple times. I swear to you, every time I read them, there's something else that irks me. And that is something that I never picked up on. Yeah. So it wasn't, let's go investigate as we should. It's, let's go get an arrest. One of the people that I interviewed for this, Stephen Jackson, he's really interesting because and I don't really go into his background too much, but he grew up in Panaca, so he knows Blaze. He's an attorney, and before he was an attorney, he worked in news, and his boss was like, oh, we want to do a story about meth problem in Las Vegas, and he was like, oh, I know someone arrested for meth, and he looked into the case and was like, what the hell, right? And it's part of the reason he became an attorney. Isn't that beautiful? But he also knows every single one of the players involved. You know, I said how Blaze talked to Dixie Tinkin and Laura Johnson. When he talks about Dixie Tinkin, and I think I even have this quote in there, he's like, it is an abomination that woman was able, because he said, she just talks, and it's like, she exaggerates. And I talked to Dixie Tinkin, who declined to be involved in multiple, this is years ago. But so I can't say, but the way he described her was like, she exaggerates, and oh my God. And he's like, I can just imagine the phone call that she made to Laura Johnson. So maybe Laura Johnson then was like, oh shoot, something really did happen, you know?
Yeah. she started using drugs at a very, very early age. 14 is what I've heard is when that
I think 13
started.
is when I've heard too. So right around that time.
Right. And so that already, put her at a disadvantage. And she struggled with depression, to what I understand. She had been taking antidepressants at times. She attempted suicide twice. She was already very vulnerable, and she was the perfect person for these seasoned detectives, especially Detective Thalson, who had decades of experience. I mean, she was the easiest.
To wreck.
Yeah, she was the easiest target for him.
So you brought up, thank you, because this is so important to this case. You talked about her upbringing, and then Detective Thalson. When he went to go talk to her, she's 18, keep in mind. Do you remember how you were when you were 18? Not well.
Not mature.
And you can imagine coming down off drugs too, right? What did he do when he went and talked to her?
He just referenced her past molestation, the first sentence that he said to her, and she just broke down crying immediately. I don't know if he said, I looked at your file, but that is where he eventually said the reason why he knew that.
So, hi, I'm here to talk to you about a murder. Also, remember when you were raped?
Yeah.
The first sentence, hi, I'm here to talk to you about a murder, that's already going to throw you off, right? And then the next thing, let me also just bring up the most traumatizing thing that's ever happened to anybody.
Yeah.
So when Detective Thalson is talking, and he alludes to this in his testimony, when he is talking to Blaze, you'll notice the recorder goes on and off and on. And so the insinuation is that he talked to her, turned it off, talked to her, turned it off. So we don't even know everything that was said. Blaze testified that he brought up her rape multiple times, and she started crying every single time. And then on the recording tape, you hear her hysterical.
Mm-hmm. In the film, we actually portrayed this exactly. Her last words on the recording was, "This happened over a month ago." Click.
Think.
He stops the recording.
I just got chills.
He knew that right then she was starting to say things that could put her somewhere else, or show that her explanation was about a different event, and he didn't want to risk any of that, so he went ahead and stopped that recording. Yeah.
So we need to talk about her when she is talking to the police. She starts talking about something that happened to her. Mm-hmm. From what we can tell, Memorial Day, end of May, 2001. Talk about what she tells police. Talk about her attack.
She was getting out of her car at the Budget Suites. She didn't know her attacker at all. It was just presumed to be another homeless man. He attacked her, attempted to sexually assault her. She carried a pocket knife that her father gave her and showed her how to use fairly well. So, thank God, because she could have been even worse, the situation. She pulled it out and stabbed him in the groin. She didn't know what happened to him. So when the detectives came and said, "I'm here investigating murder," instantly she thought, "Oh my God, I killed someone." Mm-hmm. So in her mind, she really thought that she did something wrong. She had a lot of guilt. And the fact that it was justified because she was defending herself, and you can use deadly force if you're the victim of a rape. That's legal, at least in my state, I believe. In Nevada,
I think so.
Yeah.
Even if it's not, if someone is trying to rape me, I'm probably going to do what I need to do and deal with the consequences later.
Yeah, and that's why she made some really incriminating statements that really came back to haunt her. She said, "Dad, I told you I did something awful, and I did what I did, and now I'll have to pay for it." And she said, "Mom, I did it."
Yeah.
Said that direct quote. So she was talking about another event, but just put yourself in the mind of the jury, hearing that statement when the police are asking her about this murder. It's hard to shake that.
So let's talk about that. So in the police's defense, right, so Blaze actually, she tells police she doesn't know if she cut, so her attacker's on top of her, she pulls out her knife, she slashes what she could. She actually tells police, "I don't know if I cut it off," right? So, but when probation officer Laura Johnson calls Metro Police drive up there to arrest Blaze, Laura Johnson calls them and says, "Do you have a case where a man's penis had been cut off?" And of course they did. This was July 20th, so this had been about 2 weeks. I also want to stress the lack of investigating police did between the murder of Duran Bailey and that phone call. So in police's defense, they had a man without a penis, and then they have a call from a woman who says, "Do you have a man without a penis?" So I can see how they put those two and two together, but it was the lack of trying to differentiate the cases, the time, the place,
Yeah, going to interview Blaze was the right thing to do.
Sure.
You know, you got to follow up on that. I mean, out of all the things they didn't follow up on, at least they did that one right move. But like I said, he went to arrest her, not interview her.
Right.
I tried to, put myself in the minds of the jury, because when you hear all the things together, it's clear that she didn't do this. But as
the
you're
one-offs,
hearing them,
you're like, ooh.
Yeah. I hate giving the prosecution credit, but they did a good job making a mountain out of a molehill when they didn't have much, and they made it just sound like a lot,
We'll get into all of that.
Yes, we will. We'll get into the trial. In another episode.
One thing I want to touch on before we wrap up on Blaze's attack and talking about this episode is, okay, Blaze didn't go to police about her attack in May, right? How do we know it happened? How do we even know that this attack happened, right? Blaze began telling people May, June, and early July that she had about this attack, that she had slashed a man, that whatever. Duran Bailey was July 8th. She'd been telling people for months?
Yeah.
That's crazy. Mm-hmm. So either all these people are lying for her, or she created an alibi to go and then commit the murder. Like
She planned it months in advance. Some random homeless person.
She was telling people about it way before it even happened.
Right.
How do you convey when the attack happened versus the Duran Bailey?
I mean, we show the attack,
depict
it, so you see that that's obviously not the murder.
I'm like, how did you do it?
Yeah, she didn't knock his teeth out and all this stuff. So you can tell that's different. So that's obviously how they know. But we also show, Laura Johnson reporting that, and then the detectives going, and you hear inside conversation between the detectives.
Which I have seen that part. It's not as I hear that conversation. Exactly. Like, we have two penises. Yeah. Like, what do you of course this is the same case.
Right. Yeah, Fallon says, how many people out there are cutting dicks off? I mean, come on. Like this.
Not a lot.
The speakers are perp, okay?
Yeah. So to wrap this up, unless you have something else, I feel like they had this body of a clearly homeless person. I cannot speak, but they say their case went cold, right? They testified to that before the call from Laura Johnson. They had so much evidence. They had a rape victim, but their case went cold, right? To me, it seems like they just weren't going to investigate that murder, unfortunately. And we can talk about this, but Las Vegas during this time was wild. Like, the FBI, crime was, I think, 40% higher, violent crimes in Nevada than in Las Vegas than anywhere. It was a very different time, right? I feel like they had other murders that, not that they were more important, but were being prioritized. I think they got this call from Laura Johnson, and they were like, on it.
I mean, let's be honest. I'll say more than what you just did. Is
I'm trying to be delicate.
He's an African-American, homeless man, criminal, drug addict. Like, it in their minds,
it wasn't.
You said prioritizing. I'm gonna go a little further and say that they don't care about people like that.
I think that they had possibly some other crimes that were ranking a little bit higher until they were like, because detectives, prosecutors, it's all about what they get, an arrest, a conviction, and I think this was an easy one.